I moved into the new apartment on the heaviest rain day of the year. 7th floor, an old building in Brooklyn, windows looking out over a wet street and gray rooftops. Small apartment, cheaper than I expected for the area, and when I asked why, the building manager, a man named Frank, silver hair, eyes that tended to look away when he talked, just said, "Last tenant stayed a long time. Old smell takes a while to go." I didn't notice any smell. I only noticed the rent. My name is Sam. 29 years old, just moved down from Boston, working as a freelance editor and without enough money to be choosy. The first knocking came on the third night. It was close to 2 in the morning. I was working late, desk lamp on, music in my headphones. I took them off to get some water and heard it, a steady knocking from below the floor. 3 beats, then a pause. 3 beats, then a pause. I thought of the neighbor on the 6th floor. Maybe they were doing something late. Maybe pipes. I didn't think much of it and kept working. The next morning I ran into Frank in the elevator and asked about the 6th floor neighbor. Frank looked at me and then looked away. "6th floor's been empty since last month," he said. "Under renovation. Nobody down there." I nodded and didn't ask more. The knocking came back the following night. And the night after. Always close to 2 in the morning. Always 3 beats, a pause. 3 beats, a pause. Steady as a clock, lasting around 15 minutes and then stopping completely. On the 7th night I lay down on the floor and pressed my ear against it. From below, through the wood and the concrete, I could hear more clearly. Not the mechanical sound of pipes or equipment. A rhythmic, deliberate knocking. Like someone tapping with their hand. And in one moment, between 2 knocks, I heard something else. Breathing. Fast, shallow, like someone trying to hold back from crying. I pushed myself up off the floor. I went down to the 6th floor that same night. The 6th floor hallway was darker than the 7th. A burned-out bulb no one had replaced. I followed my phone's flashlight to the apartment directly below mine, number 612. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The apartment was empty, just as Frank had said. No furniture, walls patchy with water damage, the smell of old paint and dust. I swept the light around the room. No one there. I stood in the middle of the empty room and looked up at the ceiling. Above it was the floor of my apartment. The space between the ceiling and the concrete slab was about half a meter, enough for electrical and plumbing to run through. I swept the flashlight toward the corner of the wall and found the small door. A maintenance access door, the small panel kind, opening into the technical cavity between floors. It was open a crack. I didn't open it further. I went back upstairs, locked my door, and sat up until morning. The next day I found Frank. "The maintenance cavity between the 6th and 7th floors," I said directly. "Is there anyone in there?" Frank paused long enough. Long enough for me to know this wasn't a surprising question. "Why are you asking?" he said. "Because I hear knocking from below every night. And I think I heard someone breathing." Frank looked at me for the first time without looking away. There was something in his eyes, not surprise. Tiredness. The look of someone who has known a story for a long time and grown weary of keeping it. "Sit down," he said. Frank told me about apartment 712. My apartment. The previous tenant was a woman named Rose. 52 years old, lived alone, worked as an accountant. She had lived in that apartment for 11 years. And in those 11 years, according to Frank, she was the best tenant he'd ever had. Always on time, never complained, never bothered anyone. Until the day Frank received a call from Rose's company. She hadn't come in for 3 days, wasn't answering her phone, wasn't responding to emails. Her colleagues were worried. Frank went up to the 7th floor and knocked. No answer. He used the spare key. The apartment was empty. Clean, tidy, everything in its place. No sign of a hurried departure. Her wallet on the table. Her keys hanging by the door. Her phone charging in the wall. Rose had vanished as though she had never been there. The police investigated. Found nothing. The case remained open with no progress. A year later, the building relet the apartment. "How long before I moved in did she disappear?" I asked. 14 months, Frank said. "And the maintenance cavity?" Frank looked at his hands. "The police checked it. Didn't find anything. Did you check?" A long silence. "No," Frank said. His voice had dropped. I didn't check. I called the police. Not because I was certain, but because I had heard breathing and I couldn't do nothing. 2 officers came, one young, one middle-aged. They listened to me with the expressions of people who had heard too many calls that led nowhere. They went down to the 6th floor. They opened the maintenance access door. I stood in the hallway and waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the young officer stepped out and said, "Can you come in here?" Not a question. The maintenance cavity was narrow, dark, smelling of damp and dust. The middle-aged officer was crouching in the corner, flashlight aimed below a large pipe. They had found Rose. Not Rose alive. What remained of Rose after 14 months in that dark cavity. But what the officers asked me to confirm wasn't that. They asked me about the knocking. Where it came from, what it sounded like when it started. I answered. Then I asked, "Why do you need to know that?" The middle-aged officer looked at me. Because according to the forensic estimate, he said slowly, Rose had been dead for at least 12 months before she was found. I looked at him. "But you said the knocking started on your 3rd night here," he continued. "Which means 3 days ago." I understood what he was saying. The knocking had started 3 days after I moved into Rose's apartment. 12 months in that dark cavity, and Rose had never knocked until someone new was living above her. Until there was someone who might hear. I didn't spend another night in that apartment. But what I think about every time this comes back to me, what I can't stop thinking about, is the simplest question. If the knocking started the moment I moved in, then the people who lived there before me, in those 12 months before the building relet the apartment, had any of them ever heard it? And if they had, why didn't they do anything? Or maybe they had and Frank just hadn't told me. I never asked Frank that question. I didn't want to know the answer.